Inflation has hit a 32-year high, so what will that mean for next year's election? Well, let's bring in political editor Brent Edwards. So, Brent, inflation has been this high before. What's the difference this time?
Yeah, well, inflation, Statistics New Zealand's going back to 1990 when I think it was 7.6 in the June quarter then, but earlier than that, through the 1980s, we'd had sustained high inflation, double-digit inflation. I mean, you're too young to remember, Jono, but I do. High
You do,
inflation,
Brent, yeah.
yep, and interest rates over 20%. So we've been here before. But that time had been hit by the double oil shocks of the 70s and a range of other things. And the New Zealand economy too was very, very heavily regulated, and that led on to the Rogernomics reforms of that 1984 to 90 government. But I guess one of the big differences this time around is most people aren't used to it. We haven't had it for a long time because as a result of the Reserve Bank Act and a whole host of other initiatives, inflation was brought under control, helped by what was happening internationally as well. We, basically imported a lot of, if you like, disinflationary pressures, import prices much lower and that kind of thing. And most of that's now switched around. So for most of us who have been used to a relatively benign inflationary environment, this is quite different.
Well, how are the political parties responding?
Well, the government has responded, obviously, under some pressure, and then the day before that latest CPI figure came out, announced that it was extending the support that it was giving in terms of the half-price public transport, the cuts to the fuel tax, etc., and extending that
Was
through.
that cynical timing, though, Brent?
Well, you can say it's cynical. I mean, I would call it political, Jono. I mean, because it either did it then or it did it after the announcement, and either way it was possibly going to be criticised. But
The day before, though.
Yeah, but clearly it was obviously trying to offset that announcement. It would have known the number was going to be high. Everyone knew it was going to be high. But having actually put those initiatives into place, it cannot remove them while inflation's this high. So it had to at some point announce that it was going to be extended again. The big question will be, will it have to extend it again and again? And when you look at the outlook for inflation, that's likely.
Will this make a difference to next year's election?
Well, I think it's certainly putting huge pressure on the government around the election, and what you've got from the opposition parties is they're really, really criticising the government over the cost of living crisis, and they're putting up a range of initiatives, they say, which would help alleviate the pressure on inflation, and that's about, well, I think National's words are bringing government spending under control, but effectively talking about government spending cuts, tax cuts, and also both ACT and National as well talking about giving back the Reserve Bank that sole focus on inflation and not worrying about employment. So there's a range of, you're going to see, whereas the government will go into the election talking about what it's done, about maintaining government spending, about the support it's providing in terms of helping boost pays through obviously raises to the minimum wage that have happened over the last number of years, but also fair pay agreements that will be coming into play by then, obviously. So there'll be quite a contrast between the centre-right parties and the centre-left parties, and inflation will be at the core of that. I guess from the government's perspective, it will be hoping that a year from now those inflation numbers are a lot lower than they are now, and that might give it some kudos going into the election. But if those numbers remain pretty high and people are feeling their back pocket and there's not much cash there, that's going to make it very, very difficult for the government in the election.
Brent Edwards, thanks for joining us.